So I actually would I think I would tie in the last verse of our reading today. May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God and the steadfastness of Christ, to the first verse that I read, but which isn't in the lectionary, where you see similar language. So, brethren, stand firm, hold fast to what? How are the Thessalonians supposed to endure? How are they supposed to keep that endurance and that steadfastness in the face of opposition? By holding fast to the traditions that they were taught by Paul, either by word of mouth or by letter. Now, what is that a reference to? Well, we could do a whole study just on this verse. But I add it to the lectionary today because it is an important verse especially for us as Catholics, to be aware of. That in the letters of St. Paul, who is sometimes depicted as an opponent of good works, we see him affirming good works. And in the letters of St. Paul, who is sometimes depicted as an opponent of tradition, right? That's somebody who's advocating for Scripture alone rather than tradition. We also see Paul saying very clearly to his Thessalonian readers, no, you actually need to stand fast. You need to hold firm to the traditions. The Greek word here is paradosis. It means something handed over, something handed down. Didomi means to give, para means to hand over, to give across, it's hard to get it, to hand down. The same word can actually be used, like when Jesus is handed over to the authorities in the Gospels, it's the same verb. So a tradition is something that's been handed over or handed down from one person to another. So Paul says, stand fast and hold firm to the traditions which you received from us, whether by word of mouth, which would be the preaching of Paul and Silvanus and Timothy, or by letter, which would be what? 2 Thessalonians, right? Or 1 Thessalonians would be obviously the primary referent here, okay? And it's precisely these traditions, whether they're oral or written, that will enable the Thessalonians to have endurance in the face of opposition, right? To stand fast in the face of error or confusion or the kinds of errors that we see described earlier on in the letter. So I bring that verse up and I add it in for two reasons. The first reason is I actually think that Paul, when he ends the section for the reading today, and he's talking about the steadfastness of Christ and the Lord directing their hearts to the love of God, he's picking up on the theme of them needing to hold fast in their hearts, so to speak, the traditions that they've learned from Paul. That's what will equip them to have endurance in the face of opposition. The second reason I bring it up, though, is just to remind us as Catholics here of the fascinating point that Paul not only asserts and affirms the importance of keeping traditions, but he also reveals to us that tradition can take two forms. It isn't just oral tradition, which is how we tend to think of it primarily. It can also be written tradition. In other words, the scriptures themselves are a kind of manifestation of tradition, right? Insofar as they are the inscribed version of the oral preaching of the apostles. Okay? So when Paul says, hold fast to the traditions you received for us by word or mouth or by letter, what he means is, I'm either giving you tradition when I was teaching you, when I was with you, or I'm giving you tradition when I was writing the letter to you, the letter of 1 Thessalonians. Either way, the tradition is nothing other than the gospel that Christ gave to the apostles, and then which the apostles hand over or hand down to their congregations and to their readers in the scriptures. So that's a pretty fascinating text, I think, for us as Catholics, because it shows the problem of the idea of the erroneous version of sola scriptura, which has been so popular in many Christian circles for centuries, since the time of the Reformation. That popular idea, although there are sophisticated versions of it, but the popular idea that, well, I believe in the Bible and not in the oral traditions or in the unwritten traditions of the apostles. I just accept the Bible. Well, that's impossible to reconcile that with Paul's own understanding of tradition when he says that, number one, tradition is something you have to hold fast to, but number two, it can also take multiple forms. It can be in an oral form or in a written form. So the point is that for Paul, authentic apostolic Christianity, as he's trying to hand it over to the Thessalonians, who are just a little baby congregation. They're just starting to learn the basic contours of the gospel. Already Paul is telling them that authentic apostolic Christianity means you hold fast to any tradition given by the apostles and with the authority of the apostles, whether it's written down, as in the scripture, or whether it's oral, as in the preaching and teaching of Paul and other leaders like him. So I just bring that up because it's an important corrective to an overly negative view of tradition that you sometimes see in certain Christian circles. So anyway, I'd like to close here just by way of illustration by referencing two fascinating early church fathers who talk about this verse that we just heard from St. Paul and about the importance not just of the written traditions and the scriptures, but the unwritten traditions of the apostles as well. So the first one is from